and welcome to DOC Open Talk, today from the beautiful island of Rhodes in Greece, the 15th Rhodes Forum Dialogue of Civilizations. My name is Thomas Fassbender, and I'm proud to present to you my guests today. To my right, Anne-Marie Buschmann-Petit, co-chair of the Association of International Mobility, Adrian Pabst, reader in politics at the University at Kent, Anatol Lieven, professor at Georgetown University in Qatar, and Ben Aris, editor-in-chief at BNE IntelliNews. Welcome to all of you. Let's dive straight into it. Imagining possible futures is the subject and the theme of the Rhodes Forum 2017. Among the few notes I took down at the opening sessions are three topics that I remember especially. Uncertainty as a characteristic or the characteristic of our age. Humiliation as a root cause for most or maybe even all of international conflicts. And multilateralism and dialogue as the way or the only way out. Anne-Marie, you lived several years in South Asia, so if the statement regarding the humiliation is true, it should ring a bell, does it?
I lived 6 years in India. No, it doesn't ring a bell, not for India, not for Indians. The Indian population is first of all, a wonderful population. They do not feel, I think they do not at least express their humiliation of having been colonized. They're actually very proud people and proud of everything that they are achieving nowadays. Of course, there's the notion of lose of face, but that's a personal thing. In a personal relation, you can lose face, and that indeed is very important for Indians in the Indian society. But I don't feel, no, I've never felt living there that humiliation has created anything important for them, no.
When the term humiliation actually came up, it was also, it also had a present connotation with regard to sort of perceived lecturing of other people of third people by second people or first people. Anybody would comment on that element? Do we still have, in a post-colonial age, do we maybe still have an element of humiliation of other peoples in our world?
Well, I think there's a lot of humiliation in everyday life, but usually within countries, perhaps more so than between them. A lot of people feel that their own ways of life, their values, their work, the places where they live, their identities, their family aren't respected, and especially not respected by certain elites who are very mobile, who are all about change, who are very detached from a majority in their own country. So I think people feel humiliated at the workplace, in their communities, but it tends to be, I think, more of a national question and one where countries feel humiliated by others.
Except maybe the African continent. So today, the last session I was in, there was a lady from Africa who was talking about that the African people feel, that there is humiliation when Western countries are trying to say you have to do this or you have to do that, etc. So maybe there.
So, we cover former Soviet bloc, and certainly if you take humiliation in the sense that countries in the region there feel that their views and ideas are being ignored and that they're being dictated to by the superpowers, then you take a country like Russia, but not only Belarus, also very explicitly has said over and over again with the IMF and other multinational agencies, don't tell us what to do, it's our country, we're in charge. And in Russia's case, Putin gave this very famous speech in Munich at the Munich Security Council in 2007, where he explicitly said that we're fed up of being told what to do, and that we have our own national interests, and we feel like they're not being respected. And he gave a warning there that if they weren't taking into account their point of view, that they would react. And subsequent events have shown that actually ended up being quite an extreme reaction. So in that sense, the humiliation of the emerging Europe countries in particular has been very counterproductive. It's real, and they've reacted to it militarily. It's causing all the problems that we have today.
And in the Muslim world, where I now live, this theme of humiliation has been absolutely central for well over a century. now. You know, the feeling that a great civilization has been attacked, subjugated, denigrated, marginalized, you know, and constantly bombarded with change which it itself has not willed or had control over. I mean, this has been a major source of extremism in that part of the world, and in the past, of course, of anti-colonial nationalism, but that partly itself, you know, it defeated itself by its internal contradictions, and partly, of course, was defeated by the US and Israel. But those feelings now, of course, very often flow into Islamist extremism.
It fits into what one participant from Iran yesterday told me, that he said at the root of terrorism is the West. Yeah? Of course, this is a overstated statement, yeah. But what he was coming from was, of course, an anti-American point of view, Al Qaeda, USA, etc. But it sort of fits in that, in a way, we as Western people, even unwillingly maybe, have been by telling others how to be and how to behave, have created the feeling of humiliation.
Well, but it's, you know, one shouldn't simply also accept all of this as justified, because
No.
of course it's not just what the West has done, it's also that this may now be gradually fading into the past, but of course for a considerable time now the West has set a standard of economic success and socio-economic progress, which unfortunately, you know, certainly by far the greater part of the Middle East has not, you know, been able to achieve or emulate.
When we move from humiliation to multilateralism, because I myself, I'm a bit struggling with the idea to what extent or how multilateralism can be the solution to conflicts caused by humiliation. Because even look at the EU internally, we have lecturing. The Poles and the Hungarians are presently lectured for being insufficiently democratic, etc. At the same time, we are all part of a multilateral, some say the model multilateral organization institution, the European Union. Anybody commenting on that dichotomy?
I mean, multilateralism has a very 1990s ring to it, doesn't it? It's a sort of the great era, you know, after bipolarity, we moved into sort of multilateral world of, you know, conflict, you know, mediation and settlement. And of course, the reality is very mixed, because the 1990s, whilst being a decade of great opening and opportunity, were also a decade of huge disorder with, you know, conflict on the Balkans, Rwanda, you know, all sorts of violence and wars where unfortunately multilateralism did not work. So I don't think we should just assume that multilateralism is the only way. I think it's definitely part of an answer to where we are. But I think in order to have an answer, we need to understand what the problem is. And the problem is one of profound insecurity. You know, the idea that there are now forms of economic and cultural insecurity we didn't have 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 50 years ago. Well, certain populations are within countries and, you know, across certain regions. And that I think is the source of a lot of the problems. And the question is, how do you deal with that profound economic and cultural insecurity? Now, multilateralism is, I think, part of the mix, but I don't think it's a panacea. A lot of stuff has to be done very locally, very regionally. And yeah, you can have partners from outside coming in to help, but I think it's predominantly about trying to give power to people who feel powerless. Generally sharing power rather than dictating to them, whether it's from one level, the nation-state level, or from a multilateral coalition. Because if a multilateral coalition tells you to behave in a certain way, that may not work very well either.
But isn't multilateral, okay,
No, I was just going to say that I live at the moment in the middle of one of the great failures of multilateralism.
Yeah.
The Gulf Cooperation Council was supposed to be one of the bodies which was going to emulate the European Union and even NATO in its own region. You know, 3 members of the GCC are now ganging up on a 4th one with 2 others standing on, you know, on the sideline. And this is also about the way in which the unwitting, the unintentional result of US invasion of Iraq has been to reawaken ancient hatreds and fears between Sunni and Shia, and between Saudi Arabia and Iran, in a way which is often said threatens the region with a 30 years war. So, you know, this is not looking good from a point of view either of multilateralism or the it's sometimes a rather naive idea that if only we left people alone in their own region, they would all love each other and work together.
No, because what you say actually is that it all goes back to religious differences.
And state differences. I mean,
Yeah.
and the ambitions of the Saudi and the Iranian states.
Isn't there a fundamental tension here, though? Because, I mean, with the process of globalization, that lends itself to multilateralism. We build a global village. But at the same time, at the moment, everyone seems to be turning in on themselves. And so we're seeing these tensions in the European Union and outside, too. And again, on the other hand, you've got countries like Russia, China, who are arguing for a multipolar world, but that's in tension with the existing order. And so I see that all these tensions are unresolved as well. It's not clear to me where this is going. The high water mark of globalization was maybe Russia's accession to WTO. But then, since then, we've been retreating and we're now moving rapidly towards protectionist regimes. And what the root cause of that is still not clear to me. I think maybe it's driven by the Great Recession that followed 2008, the financial collapse. And that's lack of money has put tension on people, reduced standards of living, and then that naturally results in a drive towards populism, nationalism. And on top of that, you've had the Middle East wars, which have driven migrants into Europe, which is also destabilizing and again driving nationalism, whereas the grand plan had been globalization, cooperation. And we're sort of stuck in this quagmire between these two poles now, and everyone's floundering around.
Because globalization has left people out. That's why Trump has been elected. That's why there's a Brexit. It's the left out people who have.
And surely that's going to get worse.
That.
I mean, one of the topics that's been discussed here is the effect of technology and mechanization, automation.
Yep.
This is only going to make that problem worse.
Yeah.
And yet the governments are not dealing with it so much as they're focused on prosperity, corporate, making money at the corporate level. And this whole, we talk about Trump, the people that were left out and voted him in, but in Germany we just had elections with the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, and it was the same thing. They stole 1 million votes from the CDU, the Merkel's party. They stole 500,000 votes from the SDP, the leading opposition party, but their main gain was 1.2 million votes from people who simply never vote.
No.
And there's a constituency of people who are not engaged in politics or society in Germany who clearly are left out. And AfD were able to marshal that. I mean, it means they probably won't have to do it again next time. But certainly it was a very loud cry to the government. We need to be more inclusive. And yet the direction, particularly with the way technology is taking it, is the opposite direction.
Well, I think that's right, and the social and economic discontent really is quite palpable, including in very rich countries, because it's really the case that not just at the level of income inequality, which actually in some cases has declined, but at the level of asset inequality, that a very few people own, more than half of a country's wealth, and that it's not just that people mind that there are some very rich people. That's never been the problem. In America, wealth is not the issue. The question is one of fundamental injustice, that people get wealth through ways that are simply seen as totally unfair. So you get these senior bankers with bonuses when they do well, and with huge golden shake hands when things go badly wrong. You kind of think, well, where's the justice in this? Were you rewarded for failure? I mean, it's a perverse system of incentives and rewards. And I think it's really the sense that there's a profound injustice that people are revolting against, rather than just, the fact that some have more than others. That's always been true. That's never been a problem in America or Europe. Dispossession, I suppose, is the way that one could maybe think about this. That people feel dispossessed economically, but also culturally, and they feel there's no real justice, that it's not a fair system, that the system is, to use Trump's terminology, rigged against them. And that's really quite, I think, palpable.
I think you can make an argument the system is now broken in so much as the corporatization, that is a function of globalization as well. The global companies within your country then become your ambassadors, and they are your source of wealth, and also to commercially imperialize the rest of the world. But the little person, the little man, gets missed out.
True.
And
he's being fired. He's being fired, and he doesn't get enough money to live even a year. But the same CEO of that company has an enormous bonus. Yes.
I would just add one thing, which I myself was very surprised by, because for a long time I thought this narrative of the left behind, the losers of globalization have sort of risen up with the Brexit vote and Trump and so on. That's still true, except that it's also interesting to look at some of the demographics who voted Trump, who voted for Trump, who voted for Brexit. A lot of these are well-to-do people. So it's not just, the former working class, it's not just the poor, it's also that a lot of very affluent people felt that maybe the other options on the table were not to their satisfaction. So a lot of people, for instance, the more wealthy baby boomers in Britain all voted Brexit. And it's an interesting question to ask, well, why? They were not struggling. They'd done really well, free education, free healthcare. They got on the housing ladder, a long time ago. So why did they vote? Why did a lot of the Republican voters stick with Trump when he was such an unorthodox, unconventional candidate? So yes, the narrative about the left behind works, but only up to a point. It doesn't explain the whole story. So it's just interesting to perhaps,
that's a very interesting point, because it gets me to my first topic, uncertainty. For example, the term injustice, as you described it, it's very obvious. There is an injustice, but in Germany at the last elections 10 years ago, the Social Democrats, they built their campaign solely on injustice and completely fell through, because injustice is one thing that people feel, but there is a second, uncertainty. And people, good part of the population, I would say in my country, in Germany, it is not so much that they sort of demand more in terms of we want a more just policy, so we vote classically leftist, but what they want is at least keep what they have for an ever more uncertain future. So the uncertainty really drives also voters to the populist right. Usually it is said that in the east of Germany, there are the people like in the Rust Belt in the US left behind. But take the town of Ingolstadt. Ingolstadt is in Bavaria. Ingolstadt is a well-to-do place with the headquarters and the factories of Audi. It has a jobless rate of 2.3%. That's close to nil. Affluence very nicely spread, and you have 16% more than in the average of Germany AFD voters in Ingolstadt. This has nothing to do, or little to do, with injustice, but a lot with uncertainty. Because voting is not, say, awarding politicians for what they did in the past or maybe do in the future, but voting is a sort of bet on a future. And the more people feel we don't manage to, I think we heard that at the forum, we don't manage this future with the tools we have, the more they go to some radical alternatives.
They can't imagine a possible future.
Exactly, imagine possible futures.
But here, of course, one does have to talk about the impact of migration in the United States, Brexit, in Germany as well. This has not been nearly sufficiently discussed, but of course you can be highly affluent and still worry deeply about the demographic and cultural transformation of
the
the
demographic
country.
inversion. Let's talk about that.
Because I lived for a while in the south of the United States, in Alabama, when I was a kid, weirdly enough, and I remember reading The Economist, this great trumpeter of globalization and everything, a few years back, talking about the booming economy of the New South, and how for the first time this brought in migrants, Latinos who were not black, obviously, and were not the old whites. And you might have thought, these warriors might have thought that this would turn out very badly, but not at all. This was all going so well, and the Latinos were being accepted. And I thought, that's not the South I remember. But maybe it's changed. But of course, I was right. The white South went massively for Trump. Of course, by no means entirely, but largely because of this issue.
Same thing's happening in Germany, the migrant issue. I mean, I think Merkel was re-elected. People were actually fed up with her. There was a great advert saying, okay, Merkel, noch einmal, aber dann erst reicht. One more time, Merkel, that's enough, really, because they wanted to vote her out. But then looking at just sick her hands, and domestically, the economy's going great. And so everyone was looking to the international stage, where there is massive instability, threats of nuclear war, and then on top of that you have this migrant issue. And the assimilation of those migrants has been very difficult. And so they wanted a tough leader in order to manage this. The German voters, as I understand it, are worried about the instability in the rest of the world. And And looking around, you've got unstable leaders everywhere. Polish government at the moment is flying in the face of all the democratic values that the European Union is supposed to stand for. In Hungary, also nationalism. Putin, nationalist plus military aggression. Trump, completely unpredictable, and further east, the same thing. Whereas in Europe, you've got Germany as an island of stability, and this is why she was chosen. But we live in unstable times, we live in uncertain times, and I can't remember it being this bad, the threats and problems we have on all sides, which is undermining the whole system that we have.
And I think there's also something to do with just the sheer incompetence of some of the ruling elites. I mean, it's not for no reason that people are fed up with established, political parties and candidates when they're simply very bad at dealing with, stuff that, in the past at least seem to be working a bit better. I mean, the health service in Britain, right? It's been around for 70 years. It's the great treasure of British politics. Everyone has always been in favour of it. And then through a combination of top-down reorganization, introducing market mechanisms, all sorts of things the last 30 years, it's really been ruined. It's not always been that bad. Yeah, there was chronic underinvestment for 18 years of Conservative rule, and yes, New Labour did put in more money, but a lot of that money, for instance, went into managerial layers and endless accountancy rather than the front line. So it's just a sheer incompetence of the political class. That's not to say that all politicians are bad, that's always too simple. But it seems to be something structurally wrong when politics doesn't deliver on promises, because the people who are in politics are in it basically for professional reasons rather than reasons of vocation. They have no prior experience in any other field. Right? They've been in politics all their lives. They know nothing else. And so the whole political class seems to be more impoverished. I mean, Alan Bloom, the American writer, said, already 30 years ago, the closing of the American mind, that we were educating our people in the wrong way. Well, that analysis could be applied to our politics, could be applied to our universities. We are not turning out people who are very competent, who are visionary, who have, principles and can translate into practice. We're turning out people who are not very good at politics or banking or other things, and that seems to be a real problem.
Doesn't that explain
Macron.
your point
Let's
about...
talk about Macron.
Well,
France,
the jury is out,
yes.
Anne-Marie.
Yes, the people in France have
There's an
also
element of
voted
shifting
for
as well.
somebody who who they think might bring change, and somebody who's not either of the right, either of the left, because that's the right and the left has paralyzed France really. So the hope is that he's going to do something with it. Of course, his enemies say he's a banker, but at least he has experience in banking. Let's say that.
Fine.
Some experience anyway.
I'm agnostic. I'm agnostic.
Yeah.
Will he bring about the change?
Well, I hope so. I surely hope so, because that's why we have voted for him. He's just there, 4 months, 5 months? So let's see. But I think he is someone who wants, he has promised certain things and he wants to do them. I think he's not going to let himself being sidetracked by demonstrators. But I don't look into the future, so I don't know.
These elections of the people left behind, but even the traditional participants in the political process are just getting fed up with the system. These incumbents have been there for so long. Trump is clearly an attempt by the American population to say we want to break, we want something different. So we're going to go with this idiot, but at the same time, at least it's new, it's going to smash things, and the chance for change. France was another.
That's the same thing.
And May's failure at
Sure.
the election.
It's change versus continuity. I think that's very clear. I mean, I think with Macron, what's interesting is on the one hand, you've got someone who's clearly very able. I mean, he's got a very good mind. He's very charismatic. You don't set up a movement, create a new party, win an election, if there's nothing there. So clearly, that's very impressive. And everyone who's met him, for interviews and so on, says he's a very impressive figure. At the same time, there is the danger that he could just be a reheated version of Blairism, which is, a young person, a modernizer, starting off brilliantly, having lots of support. Look at the mandate that Tony Blair won in 1997 with the biggest landslide in British political history, and then look how it ended. So there are warning signs. Now, Macron could either be that, if he's seduced by power, seduced by globalization, seduced by whatever it might be, or he could be more like a sort of combination of John and Robert Kennedy. With some real ideas, some real grounding, who can do the dirty politics as well as, kind of lift up the nation. Who knows? I think the jury's out. It's too soon to either see him as the great savior of France and Europe and too soon to write him off. But I think the danger signs are there. If ideologically all he is just economic and social liberalism, I would worry. If he gets the point about national identity, if he gets the point that you need a Europe that protects, which is what he says, if he gets the point that Europe has to be about nations and regions and cultures, not just the state and the market, not Brussels, you know, but where people are, then yeah, there's great hope. Can Merkel match that? I'm not sure. Are there other European leaders who can help? Because one person can never do this. I don't know. But it's clearly an exciting moment because at the very least it's a breath of fresh air. But I worry with other people like Juncker. I mean, he's the wrong man in a very influential position. And the fact that the member states are not disavowing him when he talks nonsense about, you know, a federalized superstate is very worrying for Europe. And Macron, I hope, will set the tone more than Juncker. Because if it's Juncker, then frankly, this thing will fall apart because people will not support Juncker's plans for Europe.
But also, of course, Juncker, how can I put this euphemistically, you know, represents grey money transfer.
Well, indeed, absolutely.
You know, he is. I mean, Luxembourg, not just him, is a symbol of many of the things that, you know, need to be controlled by global capitalism.
That's right. Absolutely.
Well, let's not talk about the skeletons
in the castle.
There are many.
But the picture, for me, honestly, after these 2 days of the forum, the picture is quite worrying. On the asset side is certainly that we are at last able to name the problems. Even in Germany, with the populists now in parliament, nobody can continue forever to gloss over and gloss and gloss. Even say the fiercest mainstream representatives are forced to acknowledge something. But that does not mean, well, we name the problem. The liability side, so far, there are very little solutions to see. You can name the areas, as you did, Adrian, identity, protection, and these things. But when we look here at the conference, we have representatives from 60 or 70 or 80 countries or so, from all the continents. Take migration and mobility. I very much like the former president of Mali this morning when he described the picture from the view of his perspective of a young Malian. And funnily, he was the one, much more than the Europeans, who said that, well, we already live in supranational identities and citizenship concepts. The dream of having an education in France, marrying maybe an American wife, getting the relative passport, and where do we see? I mean, these are the countries that are the giving countries, and he said this all creates a big problem because it's the good people who leave. But do we see here at the forum or anywhere in the world a model, an example where the multicultural together that everybody talks about sort of really works? Does it work in South Africa? I don't know personally. Does it work in Australia?
I think it works differently, or maybe it works nowhere at the moment, but if it's going to work, then I think it will be a different model in different parts of the world, different religious communities in the world. It cannot be one model. I don't see how it can be one model. But certainly, it's sure that we have heard in this forum lots and lots of opinions, and even in one panel you have against and the fours and the pros, and we have not come up with any solution. We have indeed put on the table all the difficulties, all the problems, but solutions is very hard. It's very hard to find. Well, we were in the migration panel. We had there were opposite ideas, opposite feelings, and we would never have been able to come to a common recommendation or a model, or
I suppose since I live in Qatar, without you understand necessarily advocating this, I didn't have a chance to put the Qatari model on the table. Qatar has a population which is around 80% non-Qatari. Now, possibly even higher, possibly up, getting on for 90%. but of course they have no political rights, they have no civic rights, and they are very methodically kept moving through. But even those, whose families have been settled in Qatar for 3 generations now, fellow Arab Muslims, by the way, as well as Indians, have no possibility whatsoever, no possibility, period, of acquiring Qatari citizenship. And that's one way to do it.
It's in
not really practicable for most of the rest of the world.
Wait and see.
Okay.
I mean, we haven't. I do have to say, on a number of issues, we ain't seen nothing yet. If we're talking about inequality, we haven't really talked yet about the impact of automation and computerization. Nor, though this is more hypothetical or science fiction-ish, but we already see in declining, in rising death rates for the American white working classes, a replication in America of what we saw in Russia and former Soviet Union in the 1990s. Now, if in future to that is added genetic engineering on behalf of the rich, so that the wealthy, the 1%, become, this is something Frank Fukuyama's talked about, become virtually a different species from the rest of us, then you are talking basically about the...
Anatol, you're painting this so black and black. I don't get any light back in the picture. We have to close.
Well,
we're nearing the end.
Yeah,
I want to have some solutions.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I mean, actually, on that point, I think Anatol is right that it could all go that way. I mean, I think that's absolutely plausible, and it's probably likelier today than at any point in the last 50, 60 years. So I think we just have to be very realistic where we are. But that's not to say there's any, determinism here. There's no fatality. There's no sense that it has to go that way. There is human agency. If we use power differently, it can work. So for instance, technology is a wonderful tool as long as we are not the servants, but we remain as the human creative species, the masters, and technology helps us in our creativity. Well, quite. So that means no, but that's exactly the danger. The danger is not that we will all be replaced by robots, but rather that a very few people will control technology and thereby control us all. So the solution, for instance, is technology trust, where you share new knowledge, including new forms of automation, artificial intelligence, but make sure that it's humanized, so that it's not at the service of 1% or 20%, but at the service of everyone, by creating new forms of ownership, new forms of control. The same is true for work. Human work is never going to be fully replaced by robots or computers, but we have to value what's creative about work and then leave the kind of more repetitive tasks to certain machines that can do them better than we can. But human creativity, human agency and power are not set in stone. They themselves can be shaped by us, and the challenge will be precisely to make everyone partners in power, everyone partners in ownership. If we don't do that, then I think Anatol's dystopia, is a distinct possibility. But it's not too late. We're not at the point of no return.
The robots pay tax.
I had 2 interviews during this conference that I found particularly interesting. One with Dominic de Villepin and the other with Goodluck Jonathan. And they both made 2 points, I think, that would work towards a solution. De Villepin, particularly, he was talking about the problems in Eastern Europe between Ukraine and Russia. And he said the way to go about this is to talk to the Russians and to understand their fears and expectations. And you cannot start a dialogue until you are clear on that. And at the moment, there's a lot of hysteria with Russia. Some of it justified, a lot of it not. And Goodluck Jonathan made the point that we in Africa are trying to organize ourselves, but at the moment we're sort of junior members in the international club. And he was calling for a reform of the UN as a starting point to turn the pyramid upside down. He said the problem we have at the moment is that 180 countries can agree on a course of action and one country will veto it for its economic interests. And that is not on because it stymies a lot of what we want to do. And this call for UN reform we've heard in Eastern Europe for the same reasons, even from the Russians who actually sit on the Security Council. So I think those 2 things and the theme of dialogue, of actually talking to people, has come up over and over again. So that, and a concrete step would be to do something with the UN as a pragmatic tool.
Anatol and Marie, one short statement, final from you, each of you.
I entirely agree with what Adrian said, but of course this will require massive redistribution. We will be talking here about a completely different economic model from the one that we have had over the past generation. a revolutionary model, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that that will come, but it certainly won't be easy.
No.
Don't leave us without hope.
Exactly. I won't leave you without hope. I think the theme, which is imagining possible futures, I think we should imagine every possible future possible, and then choose the right one.
Thank you. In Russian there is a saying, "Надежда умирает последним." Hope dies last.
Yes.
And please keep hoping, keep tuned. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye.
Thank you.